Welcome to IT Pro TV. I'm your host, Don.
Coming at you live from San Francisco, California.
You're watching IT Pro TV.
Hello, and thank you for watching IT Pro TV, helping you level up with IT learning everywhere you go. I'm your host, Zach Memis, for this episode of CompTIA Linux Plus. And on this episode, we're going to be working with files. And so are you, because you're going to be working with us. And of course, Don Pizzetta is here to show us the way. Don, good to see you, sir.
Hey, glad to be here. And we are indeed going to be working with files. You'll find that in the world of Linux, a lot of things are handled either as an actual file or as a representation of a file. And we've already seen that a little bit, like dealing with hard drives, where hard drives showed up in our file path. Well, in this episode, we're going to learn a little bit about how we can work with files. Now, usually, things like text files, configuration files, really useful stuff for troubleshooting. That's stuff that we're going to look at right here in this episode. So by the end of it, we should know how to quickly view files, how to quickly access our logs and pull up information and do that all successfully right from the command line.
So how do we perform simple operations like viewing a list of files, Don?
All right, so the first command I want to do is one that we've already seen in other episodes, which is the ls command, right? If we're going to work with files, we have to have a good idea of what files are already present. If we're copying files from one location to another, or moving files, or trying to access a file, how do we even know if the file exists in the first place? And the list command is your friend. So let's pull up my terminal here, and I'm in my home directory right now, just the default where you go to with the terminal. And if I type ls and press enter, well, ls stands for the list command. So it's going to list out the files that are in the directory. Now, it listed in kind of an unusual way. It goes from left to right and then moves down to the next line and the next line and the next line. I'm not the biggest fan of that. I normally prefer to have a vertical listing or a long listing. And so I'll usually do ls followed by a -l to get that longer listing in place. So it looks a little more like this. It's really the same data, except now instead of just getting file names, I'm also getting a listing that includes things like the file permissions, which we have seen in other episodes, as well as the either creation date or modification date, depending on if it's never been modified, you're looking at the creation date. If it has been modified, you're looking at the modification date. Now, as you look down the list of files there, you might notice that some of them are different colors, right? And those colors mean things, right? So for the most part, we're really just concerned with two colors, which is your default terminal color. In my case, my default terminal color is white. So, looking at my prompt and other areas, white is kind of that predominant color. So that's my default. Those are just going to be your regular files. So when we say we're working with files, that's what we're normally looking for, the ones that show up here as white. And again, your terminal might be different. They might be gray or purple or whatever if you've changed it, but it's whatever your default is. It could be. Yeah. You got lots of options.
Chartreuse.
I don't know what chartreuse is, but
I don't either. Kind of green, I guess.
It's like a fuchsia, maybe. But some of the other ones, though, are important as well. Notice the ones that are dark blue. The dark blue ones, those are directories. Now, directories are different than files. With a file, I can open a file and look inside of it. But when I open up a directory and look inside of it, I'm going to see more files, right? So commands like ls are great for listing the contents of a directory. They're not good for listing the contents of a file. So we have different commands that we'll see for files versus directories. And that's why a lot of Linux distros will apply colors to the auto listing here. So when we do an ls, there's actually a command. I think it's like --color--auto or something like that. Apparently not. Anyhow, but that command is what's telling it, hey, I want you to show this in color. But it is by default turned on. Like if you just type the alias command, you'll see aliases that are there. And notice how ls on my system is aliased. Oh, I was close. --color equals auto, not -auto like I did. So there's telling it, hey, I want you to run in color and show this. If you're remoting into a system, it might not have that. You might see everything as gray, in which case it becomes harder to differentiate a regular file from a directory. There's also executables. Like I've got a script here, and scripts are really just text files anyway, but this one's green, and that's letting me know that it is set to allow execution. If it's a binary file, we don't want to open that up because it's going to be full of just a garbled binary mess. We can't really read that. Plain text or non-compiled code, that's stuff that we can read, and the ls command helps us to see that. Now, I did ls-l to pull up that listing. I normally add a few more little modifiers to it. When we're looking for files, sometimes the files we want are actually hidden. And in my case, I want to find a hidden file, and the hidden files, they don't show up. If you create a file and you want to hide it, you put a period as the first character or a dot. So if it's dot something, then it's going to be a hidden file and it won't show up. And if you want to see them, you can do ls-a. Give me a listing of all the files, including hidden files. And you can combine that with the L command. I usually do ls-la like that. And now I get that same listing, but notice how there's these files that start with a dot. And so, for example, if you watched our editing files with Vi episode, you've seen this one, the .vimrc right there. It didn't show up a moment ago because of that period. Now it does. And I normally combine one more command in here. Let me just get into my subdirectory here. All right. So looking at this directory, here's where we have some of the text files we worked with in other episodes, like that Dracula text and so on. And if you look at the size of it, it's 882,972 bytes. So it's listing it in bytes. And the larger a file is, the more and more bytes it's going to show there. And it becomes kind of difficult to read and figure out. Like at a quick glance, I don't necessarily know, is this 8 megabytes or 800 kilobytes? The longer numbers, the harder it is to decipher that. So I'll typically add one more option, which is H. So ls-lah at this point. L for the long listing, A to show all files, and H to show the sizes in a human readable format. And when I run it that way, now I can see that Dracula file is 863K in size. And if here, let's...
And by the way, Count Kermit was a hit. Just want to tell you.
Yeah, if you haven't watched our Vi episode, we had some fun with Kermit the Frog. So let me just do a quick combine operation here to create a bigger file. And so now I've got one that's several megs in size. And again, quickly glancing at it, it's hard to tell it is several megs in size. But if I do ls-lah, I can see that it's now showing up as 3.4 M or 3.4 megabytes, so that I know that's that dimension. So LAH, those are kind of my go-tos. This is a stock system here I haven't really messed with, but on my own personal systems, I usually alias the ls command to default to LAH and the color auto as well. So it's something you can always look into. But that's how we verify the files that are there. And we can look at other directories too. Like if I'm looking for a log message, I might do a ls/var/log to take a look at that directory and see what log files are there. And now I know, okay, I wanted to see messages, and the messages files are right here, or I can see that I've got older message files that were archived from previously, and I can spot those. So I don't actually have to change into a directory to pull a listing. I can do it from wherever, and now I've got the names of the files that I want to work with.
Well, how do we view the contents of a file, Don?
All right, there's a few different commands we can use for that, ranging from the simple to the complex. So let's start really simple, okay? The cat command. Cat, or C-A-T, will show you what's inside of a file. And if you run that, it just outputs it to the screen. For small files, that actually works out really well. Do I have a small file? Most of mine are pretty big. So the reason I'm saying, do I have a small file? Watch what happens if I cat something like, I'll cat /etc/hosts, or host. And apparently that file doesn't exist. There we go. It did have an S. I thought so. So if I cat that file, it shows me the contents of that file. There's a couple of text entries that are in here. That's what is in that file. But if I do the same thing against my Kermit file, right? That's where we have the full text of Bram Stoker's Dracula. And when I run that, the end.
Ooh.
We know that it's over 15,000 lines long. It just displayed all 15,000 lines. They just all scrolled by, and they went by super duper fast, right? Because that's what the cat command does. It just outputs the text from a file. So we'll normally want to use a different command, something that does pagination, that stops after every page so we have a chance to read it. One example of that is the more command. If I were to do more Kermit.txt instead of cat, this functions the same way, except see how it stopped on the first page? And now I can hit my space bar and advance to the second page and the third page and so on. Or you can press enter to advance just a single line. So enter in space, kind of advance forward. Now, this is nice because I can actually go through and read. But I'll tell you one big problem with the more command is you can't go back up again. So let's say I slip and I press the space bar twice and I go, ooh, I want to scroll back and see what happened. You can't. More just moves forward. So some enterprising individuals decided to create another command called less. Less functions just like more does, except you can scroll backwards if you want. So if I were to less Kermit.txt and come in here, I can still use the space bar to move forward. I can still press enter to advance a single line. That's all the same, right? But I can use my up and down arrows or the page up and page down keys to move up and down. This is way more useful if you're going to be sifting through a file. In fact, you can even use a lot of search commands just like in the Vi editor. So if I want to search forward and find something, I can do that by typing a / and then the string that I want to search for, and it'll jump down and it'll find it just like in the Vi editor. You might ask yourself, why not just use the Vi editor, which you certainly could, but in this case, we don't run the risk of potentially editing the file, right? Here, we're just reading the file, so we know we're not changing anything. When you're in Vi, there's always a chance you could accidentally change the file. So less is a very powerful way to open up a file, look at the content, see what's in there. And for me, it's really one of my go-to commands. When I want to view a file, I'll use less, and I kind of just get in the habit of that. In fact, sometimes I'll alias the more command to be less as well, so that scripts that call on more will actually give me a little bit of extra functionality.
What if we only want to see the top or the bottom of the file, Don?
You know, that happens a lot. So let's say I'm troubleshooting, right? And let's see, dmessage. When you plug in hardware, there's a log that gets created that's called the dmessage log, and it shows how hardware is being detected on your system. Well, if I plug in a USB device, I know the log entries that pertain to that device are going to be the last couple of lines. So I might just want to see the very end. Or maybe I want to see just the very beginning. What were the first things that were fired up in that log message, or the very first lines of a file? Okay. Well, less and more and cat are really designed to handle the file as a whole. But there's two other commands, head and tail. They're designed to show us the beginning and the end of a file. So if I want to see the beginning of this novel here, I could type head kermit.txt. And when I do that, it's going to show me the first 10 lines. All right, 10 is the default number. Now, in my case, that wasn't terribly helpful because it has the title and that's it. So I could modify it a little bit and say head -n to tell it a certain number of lines. And I'm going to tell it I want to see the first 20 lines. And when I run that, now I get the first 20 lines of the file. Still not all that spectacular, I guess, but this lets me see that kind of beginning. There's also tail, which is the other end, right? If I say tail kermit.txt and run it that way, I see the last 10 lines, all right? And so here I see that final quote from Jonathan Harker. It was a very suspenseful moment. I don't know if you've ever read Dracula. It's got like the lamest ending ever, but
It does. It really does.
But anyhow, so I see the last 10 lines here and it's over. I could do -n20 here and get the last 20 lines, just like we saw with head. So kind of easy to pull that up. And so that's kind of a neat little system there. Now, I mentioned troubleshooting and using things like dmessage in the log files. Well, with dmessage, if I'm plugging in hardware, new log messages are going to show up, and those show up in my main system log. So if we want to take a look at that, I could tail /var/log/messages. If I spell it right. Oh, permission denied. I need to be an administrator to look at this file. So I'm going to sudo the tail command. So I'll do sudo tail /var/log/messages. This is going to show me the last 10 log entries. And when I run that, here's the last 10. And if I start plugging in hardware or unplugging hardware, you know, changing something like that, they're going to show up right here. And I can come in and I can tail it again and see the last 10 lines and start to spot a change. Now, if you're going to be watching this like a hawk, there's actually a neat little command you can use with tail, which is -f. And what -f says is we want to follow the last 10 lines, okay? And so when I run that, it's, whoops, I need a space in there. It's tail space -f. There we go. So now it shows me the last 10 lines, and then it sits there, okay? Well, it hasn't actually returned me to a prompt because what it's doing is it's watching, and anytime a new line is added, it's going to show up here on my screen. All right. So, for example, I'm gonna leave this window kind of running right here, and let me open another window. Oh, actually, I didn't even have to do anything too much. A log message was just generated, right? I was about to generate one on my own, but I can see this new entry just came in right here. So technically, I'm viewing the last 11 entries. But it's cool because I can see what's going on. And so now I could plug in the trouble device and see what messages show up, and then unplug the device and see what messages go away, and use that as part of my troubleshooting. So tail -f, following a log file, really, really handy. I wouldn't want to use follow against the Dracula book here, right? Because there's no new lines that are going to be coming in, so it's not useful there. But for troubleshooting logs, really cool utility.
How do we go about moving a file to a different location?
Yeah, we can certainly move files around. Actually, we kind of need to make a choice. When we have a file in one directory and want to put it somewhere else, you can either copy it or you can move it, right? When we copy it, we're making a duplicate. So the original stays right where it is, and then we place the new one somewhere else. With a move, we're actually destroying the original. We're removing it from its original location and putting it somewhere else. So let's say, for example, I wanted to archive these log files. I was still following. You can hit Control-C on your keyboard to cancel out of the following. Control-C is like a breaking command. And so we can get out of that follow and get back to our prompt. So I'm doing some troubleshooting, and I know the log messages contain some entries in there that I want to see. And so I want to make a copy of the logs. Well, copying is usually the best thing to do because it leaves the original alone. And I can just do CP. CP is the copy command. You'll find a lot of the really old Unix commands just take words and remove the vowels out of them, right? Well, I guess they count Y as a vowel here. So copy becomes CP. So I'm going to copy, and then I'll type the source and then the destination. My source is going to be /var/log/messages. And for a destination, well, it defaults to the directory that I'm in. So I could just copy it right here and call it log.txt, or I could specify a full path. I could say, /home/dposit/documents/log.txt, right? Or however I want to specify where I want that to go to. And when I run that, I need to be an administrator to access that log. So let me sudo that command. And there we go. So it's going to copy that file. Now, the original file was called messages. The destination, I picked a different file name. Okay. If I had left log.txt off and just pointed to that directory like that, it would have kept the original name and copied it over as messages. So I overrode the file name. When I take a look in my documents folder now, I can see I've got log.txt from the first one that I copied, and I've got messages from the second time where I didn't override that name. Now, in both cases, I did a copy. So if I were to look in /var/log, I'll still see messages right there, right? I didn't mess with the original. If I do a move, though, I do mess with the original. And that can be problematic. In fact, sometimes you can't even do it. So let me go back and take that line here where I copied it. And instead of doing CP, I'm going to change that to MV, MV for move. And when I run that, it's going to move the messages file from the original location to here. And I didn't get any errors, right? It moved it over. But what actually happened, if I look in /var/log, actually, let me do a -L here and pull that up. So looking in /var/log, I can see that there's no messages file anymore. Okay, it's gone. Well, I've effectively cleared my logs at this point. And if I'm legally required to retain logs for a certain period of time, I've now damaged these logs. And sure, I've got a copy, but if I accidentally delete it or whatever, the originals are gone at this point. So that's a risk that we take. Now, the syslog service that generates that, the very next time a log message is generated, it's going to create a new file. So it'll rebuild the file, but it's only going to have stuff newer than when I moved the file in the first place. So I have effectively lost that old data if I lose track of this file. And let's see if it's recreated yet. It hasn't recreated yet. Sometimes you have to restart a service to generate something or some kind of activity. This is a lab machine, so not a whole heck of a lot's going on. I could do a systemctl restart syslog d. Get rid of the d. Let's see. Apparently that's not that service name. Oh shoot. On systemd, I'm supposed to use journal d to reset that. Well, anyhow, it'll generate a message on its own. So if I'm just patient, it'll generate a message on its own. But at this point, that kind of shows the risk there. We do typically want to copy, unless we know we don't want something to be in that original location. You can also do some really cool stuff if you want to do entire directories. So for example, inside of my documents folder, I've got a folder called files. And inside of files, I've got more directories inside of there, right? Well, you can move and you can copy entire directories if you want, right? With CP, I showed you an example with just a single file, but I could do something like CP-R, lowercase r, And with that lowercase r, what I'm doing is saying make it recursive. Copy not just this one folder, but everything that's inside of it as well. With move, you don't have to do recursive. It'll automatically grab the directory and everything that's inside of it. With copy, you do. You have to tell it, I want you to be recursive. I want you to grab everything in that tree and copy it over at the same time. So for example, I might, let's see, I might want to copy dir 1, 2, and 3, copy all of those into my home folder. So if we look inside of my home folder, I'll do an ls // I don't see directory 1, directory 2, directory 3. But if I do a CP for copy, -R for recursive, star, so I'm going to grab everything, that's a wildcard for everything that's here in this folder, and then I'm going to copy all of that to // and I run that, okay? I don't get any feedback, nothing comes back on my screen, but if I do a list for // I can see directory 1, directory 2, directory 3, all right there. I copied all 3 of them and their file contents, which we can see by looking inside of one of them. It's got a couple of files. So the recursive flag is pretty handy. You use that with CP for copy. For move, if I move the parent directory, it automatically moves everything that's inside of it too. So I don't have to use the -R with the move command.
So directories are handled the same way as files.
For the most part, yeah. If we're wanting to like copy them, using that -R is important. One thing that's different though is like if we want to create directories, that's handled a little bit different than what we do. If I want to create a file, right, we can just edit one. We saw that in the Vi episode. I can edit it. I could use the touch command as well. If I ever want to like quickly just create a couple of files to have, I'll use the touch command. Touch is a utility that lets you create new empty files or to touch an existing file to update its timestamp. So if I have a file that I know is newer and I want to make sure it doesn't get overwritten by an older file or whatever, I could use the touch command to update the timestamp and it would now be the current timestamp. So for example, let's say in my home directory, I've got a folder called files and I've now got these other things. Actually, hang on, I'm in the wrong directory there. I've got a directory called documents. I've got all these dir1, dir2, dir3. Let's say I want to put them all into a new folder, all right? And I'm going to call this folder files2. If I want to create a new folder, I can't use the touch command. See, touch, if I type touch and I say files2, it's going to create a file called files2, not a directory. So when I pull up my listing there, I've now got files2 right there, but it is just a file. It's written in white text for me, or gray, I think would be the actual default. It's just a file. If I want to create a directory, then I'm going to need to use a different command. Now, I just created that file. I want to get rid of it. We've seen CP for copy. We've seen MV for move. Now let's use RM for remove. I want to get rid of a file. So I'm going to do RM, and then we'll just do files2. All right. So that's going to remove that file and get it out of there. And so I no longer have files2. And if I want a directory, I'm going to use the mkdir command. All right. I'm going to make a directory and I'm going to call that directory files2. All right. And, when you make a directory like this, you can actually make more than one directory at the same time. So I could come in and say mkdir space files3 space files4 space files5 like that. And that's going to create 3 directories, not one directory with spaces in the name, but 3 actual directories. And so when I take a look at my directory listing now, I've got all of these files2, files3, files4, files5, all right there by using that mkdir. So if you want to create an empty file, use touch. If you want to create an empty directory, you use mkdir. Now I can move files and I can move folders. I can copy files, I can copy folders, and that's all done the same, right? Zach's question is, are they handled the same? Yes, with copy and move. But with making them, we have touch and we have mkdir. Now, removing them, if I want to get rid of them, you actually do have the same basic command, rm. rm can remove files and rm can remove directories. However, rm is not very friendly when it comes to folders that already have stuff in them, right? So if I try and remove a folder and there's things inside of it, it doesn't like that. Let me show you an example. Let me get into files2. All right, so files2 right now is empty, and I'm going to use CP-R. So I'm going to do a recursive copy of my /documents /files folder. So I'm going to get everything that's inside of the files folder, and I'm going to copy that right to this directory. Now, it will default to copying it right to this directory, but I come from a BSD background, and in BSD, you have to be a little more explicit with a lot of this stuff. And so I'm going to stick a dot at the end, all right? Dot is a shortcut that actually means the current working directory, the directory I'm in right now. So if you ever see somebody with a stray dot at the end of their command, that's what that means. You can actually do 2 dots, and that means the directory above, the parent directory, if we want to do that. So I'm just going to do an individual dot. And in fact, let me scroll up here, because you might have seen when I do my directory listings, not with the -L, but if I do an ls-LA, you'll actually see the dot and the dot show up in that list sometimes, which if I scroll back far enough in my history, I probably did an LA somewhere. Well, anyhow, I'll do one in just a moment, and we'll get a chance to see it. So I'm going to copy all those files, and I'll just verify that they made it over here, and they did. And I'll do an ls-LA right here. And as I do that, let me zoom in on this a little bit. Ooh, zoom a little crazy there. Sorry about that. So I've got dir 1, 2, and 3, and see the dot and the dot. There's those aliases. They show up if you do ls-LA, or really the A is what makes those show up. So there they are. Those are aliases. And I used the dot right here to make sure the file's copied to the right location. It's kind of a handy thing to do from time to time. All right, so I kind of got off on a tangent there. My whole point was, if I want to remove a file, I can use rm. I've already done that once. It's not too amazing. If I want to remove file 6, I do rm file6.txt. If I want to remove a directory that's empty, that's not a big deal either, right? Because you could do rm. Actually, there's a dedicated command for this, which is rmdir. We had mkdir to make one, and there's rmdir to remove one, right? rmdir. And if I do that for files 5, it removes it, right? No problem, okay? But if I try that with files 2, I get an error. And the error is telling me the directory is not empty. rmdir does not like to delete folders that aren't empty. And in fact, if I swap that out and just do rm, let me try and remove it like a file. It gives me a different warning. It says, no, it's a directory. We're not going to allow you to do that, okay? So there is an extra tag we can use here, or a command line option that we can use to force it to delete it. If we know, like, I don't need any of the stuff in files 2, I want to get rid of that, I can do a rm-r to make it recursive, right? So it's going to go through and delete everything that's inside, and f to force it. So even if it sees it's a directory, who cares? Delete it anyway. rm-rf, really, really handy command option. And then I can point it at files 2. Be super careful with this, because if you point it at the wrong spot, you could delete files that are important. I make it a rule of thumb to never use this with the sudo command, because if I did like a sudo rm-rf / then it's going to go to the root and it's going to try and delete every file that it could possibly delete. That would be really, really bad. And it'll let you do it because you sudoed. It says, oh, you're a super user, you know what you're doing, and it'll let you make that kind of mistake. So in my case, though, I'm just deleting files 2. I didn't get an error this time, and if I pull up a listing, I can see that files 2 is indeed gone. So it wiped that one out. And in fact, I could go a step further and use a wildcard and say I want to remove, so rm-rf files and an asterisk, that star. By saying file star, that means it's going to start with files, and then anything else that follows is okay. So 2, 3, 4, whatever. And I can run that. And now when I look, all of those folders are gone. So it's a little bit different working with those folders. But once they're cleared out of there, it's really not much different than files.
Thank you, Don. Awesome job. Working with files, another wonderful episode inside the CompTIA Linux Plus course series. And before we move on, anything else you'd like to say?
All of these commands have different options, and there's plenty of other ways to do this. A lot of people use the GUI because it's easier. GUI is always a little tricky because you don't see the hidden files. There's also other command line utilities, and even text-based user interface utilities like Midnight Commander that you can install that let you do file management. You can move things and all in a pseudo graphical environment. Those tools are really, really neat and really powerful, so check those out. But the tools we've seen here in this episode are all ones that you can count on every Unix system. They're all part of the GNU tool set that is really just baked into every Linux distro that's out there.
Awesome. Well said, sir. Make sure you watch every single episode of CompTIA Linux Plus. You're going to be so glad you did. And take advantage of the supplementary information in our course library. It's there to help you be even more successful. Check that out, too. And tell everybody you know about IT Pro TV. IT Pro TV is binge-worthy. Thanks for watching. I'm Zach Memis.
And I'm Don Pizzette.
We will see you again very soon.
Thank you for watching IT Pro TV.